Back on the Young Turks. It's Friday, so Jonathan Kim is in from ReThink Reviews. We're going to review a movie that certainly has political implications about Iraq. It's Matt Damon's Green Zone. So as usual, let's check out John's review and then come back and give you some fun facts.
Yeah, I had a couple questions about the intel for tomorrow. Are we sure this is accurate?
It's solid. It's good to go.
What's the source?
Well, it's a human source intel, but it's solid. It's current as of 0400.
Was it the same source we've been using on every site we've hit on the way up here? We rolled a donut.
Chief, how about we do this? Let's talk offline. Give me a list of the places where you went and the grids, and we'll make sure that you had the right information written down and that you went to the right places. Okay?
Captain, the issue isn't the grid, sir. The issue is that there's nothing there.
Stand down, Chief. We need to move on here.
Don, hold a second. Let's hear what the chief has to say.
Okay, sir, I'll give you an example. We rolled into a site, Diwania, last week. Okay, 101st took casualties securing it for us. We got in there and found it was a toilet factory. I'm saying there's a disconnect between what's in these packets and what we're seeing on the ground. There's a problem with the intelligence, sir.
Matt Damon in an action thriller directed by Paul Greengrass must be another installment of the ultra-successful Jason Bourne series, and a sure thing at the box office, right? Actually, it's Green Zone, which bears similarities to the Bourne movies with its twisty intrigue, but instead finds Damon playing non-amnesiac Chief Warrant Officer Roy Miller, whose unit is tasked with finding Saddam Hussein's WMD stockpiles in the chaos following the fall of Baghdad in 2003. Still, with the winning team of Greengrass and Damon, Green Zone should be a lock, right? Well, not really. Green Zone floundered at the box office, proving that despite the Oscars for The Hurt Locker, which didn't make much money anyway, the curse of the Iraq War movie is still very much in effect, not helped by the fact that Green Zone, despite having its heart and politics in the right place, simply isn't a very good movie. One thing Green Zone does very well is depicting the nightmare of post-shock and awe Baghdad, as the city descended into bedlam and it became obvious that the Bush administration had simply spaced on coming up with a post-war plan. Traffic across the city is snarled. Angry Iraqis are clogging the streets demanding water, food, and electricity, and everything that can be looted is getting carried away. In one of the opening scenes, you really get the sense of helplessness soldiers must have felt, as Miller and his unit arrive at a suspected WMD facility to find that the building hasn't been secured and Iraqis are emptying the place, possibly carrying away the WMDs that Miller has been sent to find. Of course, if the Bush administration had really thought there were WMDs at those sites, they probably would have locked them down, further proof that the Bush administration knew there were no WMDs. But I digress. Frustrated that his unit keeps risking their lives for nothing, Miller starts asking questions about where the WMD intelligence is coming from. He finds a sympathetic ear with Martin Brown, a CIA agent and Middle East expert played by Brendan Gleeson, who also smells a rat, urges Miller to dig deeper, and represents the many experts who accurately predicted Iraq's descent into ethnic warfare. Miller also gets a little help from Wall Street Journal reporter Lori Dane, played by Amy Ryan, who's been writing about Iraq's WMD program based on tips being leaked by a senior U.S. official based on intel gathered from an Iraqi source codenamed Magellan. That official is Clark Poundstone, played by Greg Kinnear, a neocon who will do whatever it takes to ensure that Miller and the public never find out the truth about Iraq's non-existent WMDs. This leads to Miller racing against the clock to find Magellan before Poundstone's Blackwater-style contractors do. If Dane sounds a lot like disgraced New York Times reporter Judith Miller, who helped spread lies about Iraq's WMDs based on tips she received from the Bush administration, and Poundstone sounds sort of like Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, and Paul Bremer, even using Rumsfeld's line that, quote, democracy is messy, that's no accident. Nor is the fact that Magellan might remind you of Curveball or Ahmed Chalabi, two Iraqis whose unsubstantiated, sometimes outrageous claims about Saddam's WMD programs were trumpeted as solid evidence by the Bush administration, although Magellan is pretty different from those real-life hucksters. Green Zone is also partially inspired by Imperial Life in the Emerald City, the great nonfiction book by Rajiv Chandrasekaran about life in the Green Zone. And there are two fun scenes showing the delusional bubble within the Green Zone as people enjoy fancy buffets, satellite TV, and spring break-style pool parties as Iraq crumbles around them. But while Green Zone has some tasty and admirable morsels of reality, it's primarily an action movie, which presents a problem where Green Zone is not political enough for those hoping for a look inside the Green Zone or an expose on the Iraq War, and not action-packed enough for fans of the Bourne movies. Also, Green Zone's plot is an unfolding mystery that we already know the answer to. Spoiler alert, but they don't find the WMDs. To be honest, I don't know what the Great Iraq Movie is, and when America will be able to digest and embrace movies about something as ugly and embarrassing as the Iraq War. But the same was said of Vietnam, which eventually brought us such great films as Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, Born on the 4th of July, and Apocalypse Now. So I'm confident we'll get there someday. But Green Zone is further proof that we're not there just yet. I'm Jonathan Kim, and this is a ReThink Review.
All right, John, before we get into what happened in the Green Zone in real life, what was it about the movie that didn't quite deliver? Because it seems like it has all the right parts, but I'm not sure why it was off.
Yeah, I think that the action is sort of sporadic. It's not as kind of action packed, and like Matt Damon's character, I mean, what's sort of interesting about it is that he's basically just kind of a good soldier, not in terms of just following orders, but I mean, he's wondering like, why are we here? Like, how come we're going to these sites and there's nothing here? And he's upset about it. And, you know, in that clip in the beginning, he was like, you know, this battalion took casualties trying to secure this site and we went in and there's nothing there. But he's still kind of a blank kind of character where like you don't know anything about his family or his background or what kind of guy he is. He's just sort of the soldier who's kind of out to do a good job, and he actually cares about why they went to war. And he's like, is it possible that all of this was a lie? But at the same time, I think that, like I kind of said at the end, I think there's a really good movie to be done about the Green Zone. The movie actually doesn't spend that much time there. There's maybe just a handful of scenes, and some of the scenes where they could have really been anywhere. They're just in some control, you know, room or something. But I think it's just that it's not a straight-ahead action movie, and it's not a political thriller, and so it ends up being not enough of either of those.
All right, I got you. So, like the sense I get from it, and I of course didn't see the movie, is that okay, they're like, okay, this is the background, is the politics. But now we give you the action. But you're like, okay, but he's not Jason Bourne just totally kicking ass, right? And so I'm left unsatisfied there, and you just kind of left the politics in the background.
Yeah,
is that roughly right?
You get some hints at the politics, but then it becomes this movie about trying to chase down this one guy, the ace of clubs or something, and it becomes like a race against the clock to get this guy, but in the end, you know it's not going to matter. because in the end, you know, this guy isn't going to say, I'll tell you where the W&Ds are, and they go and find them or anything. Like, you sort of know, you know how it's going to end, and you know that it's kind of all futile, and that makes the action seem a little bit kind of silly.
Okay, so how was real life in the Green Zone?
Well, in the book Imperial Life in the Emerald City, which the movie is, it more references. It's not really based on it. The book is really about how everything was screwed up. You know, both when Bremer came in and when Jay Gardner was in before, no one knew who was in charge. People get there, they don't have computers, they don't have electricity, and then basically people were given jobs where they didn't know how to do them. Most of the people who were staffed in the Green Zone were basically like young ideological staffers. Like the Bush administration, they asked Republican senators, "Hey, do you know some good guy who could go work in the Green Zone?" And it wasn't someone who was a Middle East expert or anything. They're like, oh yeah, you know, my assistant's kid is just getting out of college. He needs a job. So they sent all these young people over there, and they basically didn't know what they were doing and just kind of sat there kind of coming up with ideas for what to do. And most of those ideas were based on just conservative ideology, not on what the country actually needed. Like they talk about the guy who was kind of brought in to run to kind of fix up the hospitals there. And his main obsession was trying to figure out how to privatize the medications that Iraq was making in their own state factories, and that was his. And so that was his big obsession. And you know, there's all these traffic problems in Iraq because there was no electricity, so there were no stoplights, and there were no traffic cops. And their solution to this was, oh, we need to pass some new law, some new traffic law. As opposed to, no, we need to get people out on the streets to direct traffic and clean this up. So it was just all these ideological people who really didn't know what they were doing. But in the book, like throughout it, there's these kind of scenes that talk about sort of the craziness of the Greens and how it was just this isolated bubble where in there they had air conditioning, electricity 24 hours a day, and then just kind of all these young staffers. It says, the Green Zone had no fewer than 7 watering holes. The Halliburton run sports bar in the basement of the Al Rashid Hotel, which had big screen television with foosball table. CIA had a bar. The British had a bar. General Electric contractors had a bar. And basically, like all these young staffers, they would work hard all day, and then they put in their 8 hours, and they go out and hang out by the pool and drink and like try to get laid, basically. And he's saying that like some of the female staffers had brought like hot pants and like 4-inch heels so they could go because there was a disco on the Green Zone. So people really didn't care what was going on outside, and they didn't really care if Iraq got fixed or not. They were just kind of padding their resumes.
Yeah, GE had a bar in the Green Zone. And right before the war, MSNBC fired basically 3 anti-war hosts. That's really weird. Wait a minute. Is GE, did they own MSNBC at the time?
believe they did.
And they had a big presence in the contracts that were given out in Iraq?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, there were. I mean, we also heard about how there were fast food places, you know, in the Green Zone. I mean, it was like this little American town there. And there's also a little section in this where they talk about how there were all these stray cats around the Green Zone, around the palace, and people liked the cats and they would feed them and make them pets. But then Halliburton decided, you know, in terms of
eat them.
Close. They decided they had to kill all of these cats because this is obviously a very important priority, you know, in the rebuilding of Iraq is to kill all these cats. And so people found out about this, and so they were hiding cats in their trailers.
Why, did they think it was going to spread disease, or they just like killing so much?
Basically, they said disease. But then, so there were like these death squads that were around killing all these cats, and then they found out that people were hiding them in like locker rooms and in offices and stuff. And so when the people were out at work, they sent in these guys to go and basically snatch up the cats and kill them.
No, I mean, like if it wasn't such an enormous tragedy, it would be such a joke. I mean, they literally were killing kittens. That's how evil Halliburton is, right? See, now, I'm sure they thought it was spreading disease. They're not killing kittens just to kill kittens, but it's a perfect symbolism, right, of what happened there.
Well, that's why I think there's a really great movie to be made about the Green Zone, but it would be a comedy. Because I think the Green Zone is such an odd place. And like I said, there's like these two scenes in the movie where you get a sense of it, where Brendan Gleeson's character, the CIA guy, says to Matt Damon, like, okay, like I have some intel to give you. Meet me by the pool. And so Matt Damon comes in with his like full battle dress and his rifle and everything. And there's, you know, it's like a spring break party, you know, and people are like chicken fighting with like girls on their shoulders and like lifting weights and drinking and stuff. And he comes in and sits down and like has this briefing by the pool. But
all right, so I want to understand a couple of things. One, the Bush people, what's their motivation? I mean, look, I know you get those pad the resumes of those young ideologues. You do favors for your politicians. I get all of that, right? But were they just so stupid that they didn't realize that a 26-year-old doesn't know how to run a city? Or, I mean, how could anybody be that stupid? I mean, did they not care about the lives of not only the Iraqis, but their own soldiers that these would have obvious ramifications for? I mean, I just can't believe that they're that craven. Maybe I'm still naive after all these years. Was there something else afoot?
Well, I mean, there's a few things. One, they were kind of told that it was going to be easy, that Iraq was going to be easy. And Ahmed Chalabi actually was a big person who said that, like, oh, no, there's like this Iraqi resistance there. Like, you can just send in a few troops and then, like, basically it'll take care of itself. So partially they believe that really because they wanted to. But also, like, the more I think about it, if you think about what Republican ideology is that government does not work. Ever. It can never do anything well. Private sector should do anything. So basically the government, all it's good for is to enrich your friends and enrich companies who are probably your friends. And so this idea that so if a government actually functions correctly, it totally discounts their whole argument. So if they just saw Iraq as, oh, well, this is just a way to give money to corporations and give money to our friends, and the other stuff will probably take care of itself, you know, how bad's it going to be, really? And they figured that they'd be out of there before the 2004 election. And so they didn't think it was going to be that bad because they were in the Green Zone bubble. It didn't seem that bad because they never went outside and everything was working well in there. And then also, I mean, it was going to be just a testing ground for all these conservative ideas that fail all the time. You know, let corporations run everything. You know, no taxes. You know, stuff like that. And it was just going to be a testing lab, even though, you know, real lives were at stake. You know, like they were spending all this time trying to update the Iraqi stock exchange when 50% of the population has no jobs.
You know, it's so mind-boggling. And then when you get to the ramifications finally, you know, it turns out that if you don't have any government, or you have a government run by 22-year-old jackasses with their conservative ideology, what you get is anarchy. And anarchy caused the war to absolutely spiral out of control. I mean, how many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives because Rumsfeld, the moron, sent in 24-year-olds to run the place?
Right. And but that's the thing, it's assuming that they actually care about all of that, because they figured, you know, the fact that they didn't have a post-war plan, they didn't think they needed one.
Man, it makes me angry thinking about it. Rumsfeld was, okay, I take back what I said about Tim Geithner earlier in the week. You can't beat Don Rumsfeld for incompetence. I mean, God, he was so hideous and awful. And what was amazing about it is that in his unending arrogance. He thought he was so great.
Right.
Like, he thought, man, I nailed this thing. And he couldn't have done a worse job if you actively, like if you said to me, Cenk, screw up Iraq. Here, it's right after the war. Do your best. There's no way I could have done as good a job as Rumsfeld if I was trying to do it really badly.
Right. In the book, I mean, in Imperial Life in the Emerald City, it basically follows the first year in Iraq. And at one point, it brings up that, you know, Condoleezza Rice in the State Department should have been doing this, like, what's the government going to be? How are we going to get these ministries set up again and everything? But all of that was kind of given to, Rumsfeld basically said, oh yeah, and I'll deal with that too. And they just kind of let him do it. And then at one point, someone's like, well, shouldn't we actually be doing something? And then they're saying that because Bremer kind of became a loose cannon, where he was like the viceroy and he wasn't communicating that much, Rumsfeld was in charge of him. And the reason why, if we all think back, the Iraq Stabilization Group, which Condoleezza Rice was the head of, and did such a great job because she stabilized the crap out of that country.
Jesus. And, you know, it's finally on Rumsfeld, you know, you remember why he had no experts in the first place? Because right before the war, he fired all of the experts because he called them Arabist apologists. Here comes the facepalm. I mean, come on. So that's why they had the young kids, because all the people who knew the area, who knew the country, were fired by the moron, the eternal moron Don Rumsfeld, because they were Arabist apologists, because they knew something about the Middle East.
Yeah, that was the idea that that these young people, they would never question anything. They wouldn't say, "Oh, this is wrong." But so the idea was that these Middle East experts who've been studying the area for, that was all old. It's like old Europe, you know. It's like, oh, that's the old way. They don't know that democracy is all set to flower because Ahmed Chalbi told us that it was. And
yeah, God, man, it's sickening. It's sickening what happened in Iraq. All right, John, great review. We appreciate you coming in as always. Everybody, ReThink reviews you can find on, of course, YouTube and Huffington Post and rethinkreviews.net.